Good morning, Waihi Baptist. My name is Sean. I'm 23 years old and I go to Papatoe Community Church, which is the former church of your pastor and his family. And he's asked me to share a little bit of my testimony with you. And so very, very briefly, I was raised in a Christian household. I've got Christian parents and a younger Christian sibling. In my school years, I went to a Christian school all the way through from year 0 to 13 before I eventually headed off to the University of Auckland to study sports science. But I remember in year 13, I started to have doubts, I started to wrestle with the fact that Christianity isn't the only religion out there, and there are thousands of other religions. And what if one of those were true? And I was wondering, well, what if they're all false? And what if atheism's true? And so I can remember in year 13 really having to wrestle for the first time with the fact that I had to be sure of what I believed in. And I couldn't just take Christianity for granted and piggyback off the faith of parents and friends and teachers and church leaders. I needed to know for sure what was true. And at about the same time, a very close friend of mine became an atheist. And so he was coming at me with Christian questions about the Christian faith, really difficult questions, and he was really challenging me on why I still believed. And so I was having to come up with good answers to give him. And this would have been by the time I was heading into university at the University of Auckland. And so that sent me down this road of investigating what the true worldview is. And I came out the other end, maybe at around 19 or 20 years old, very, very confident that Christianity was actually true. And I think, as I still do to this day, that there are good reasons to believe that Christianity is the true worldview because of the evidence surrounding the historical fact of Jesus rising from the dead and all the evidence that we have that God exists. And by contrast, I think the evidence for other worldviews, which are in their teaching in tension with Christianity anyway, but even the evidence for the other worldviews I found to be wanting. And then atheism itself as a worldview did not impress me. And so I remained a Christian, and I found apologetics, and if you're not sure what that term means, you can ask Ben later, but I found apologetics to be incredibly useful. And so that saw me finish up at the University of Auckland and decide to go back to a Christian school. And so I've since, in the last 2 years, been going through a master's program studying philosophy at an American seminary with the intention of going into full-time Christian ministry, because like C.S. Lewis said, right, if Christianity is true, then there's nothing else that's more important. And so I realized that, and I decided that I wanted to give my life to this man called Jesus, and to devote myself to making sure that other people could know him. And so that's a little bit of my testimony. And I think the key lesson in that is that for anyone, regardless of what kind of household you grow up in, or how you encounter Jesus, or how you become a Christian, there still has to be this point where you make a personal commitment and you don't piggyback off the faith of someone else, like I alluded to before. And you don't need to worry about what your history is, or the family that you've been born into, or anything like that, because the Bible is very clear that God appointed our time for existence, and he very intentionally selected the moment in history and the family that we'd be born into. So regardless of who you are, everybody still has to come to this point where they make a personal commitment to pick up their cross and follow Jesus, I think. And if you don't do that, the push of the culture is so strong that you're going to fall away and you're going to give in. And I'm sure you can all think of people who piggybacked for a little bit too long on their Christian faith, and eventually the temptations of the culture were too strong for them, and so now perhaps they've given it up. But it's a lot harder to walk away from the Christian faith, isn't it? Certainly I found, if you know that it's true. because regardless of how you're feeling emotionally, you still have confidence in the truth that Jesus rising from the dead is still a matter of history. And so that's where I found apologetics to be really important. And that's kind of why I've put it at the foundation for any ministry that I might go into. And so that's a little bit of my testimony. Obviously, the toughest point, some of you will feel this as well, for people who have grown up in a Christian household and continue to be a Christian, is that you can feel a bit bummed that you don't have a really cool testimony, like some other people who have maybe become Christians from Muslim households or from the rock and roll lifestyle and then becoming a Christian. And if you've grown up in a Christian household, you don't necessarily have that amazing perceived testimony. But I've learned to live with that, I think, because when you actually look at the people who are being used by Jesus to further his kingdom, it's never their own life that intrigues people to listen to what they preach. It's always that they are magnifying the person of Jesus anyway. And so where Jesus is magnified, the gospel will spread. And so it doesn't matter really what your history is, regardless of whether you think it's boring or incredible. Jesus will use that because it's not about lifting ourselves up. It's about bringing glory to him, who is the King of the universe. And so if that's an encouragement for any of you, I would encourage you to take that, to rest in the truth that Jesus is Lord. And because if that's true, there's nothing more important in this universe, to make that the center of your life and to devote yourself to making sure that other people can know that truth too. And so that's a little bit of my story and my testimony. I hope to visit you guys very soon, perhaps when Auckland's out of lockdown. But in the meantime, I hope to continue to hear incredible stories of how God is working in Waihi Baptist